I have this amazing group of 14 fellows inside the Female Edtech Fellowship, and I hope that we'll be able to invest in some of them because they have like amazing track records. So yeah, I just want to make them more visible.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Edtech Podcast, where our mission is to improve the dialogue between ed and tech for better innovation and impact. And thanks as always to anyone who sent kind words about listening into the podcast. Today, as I record this introduction, it is International Women's Day. So what better day to release this first episode from our new series with the Female Edtech Fellowship, a collaboration between the European Edtech Alliance and Supercharger Ventures to support the growth of the most promising female founders in Europe. In this first episode, I'm in conversation with Beth Havinga and Svenja Buson of the European Edtech Alliance about female-led edtech innovation. We talk about the hopes of the fellowship and a new investment fund that Svenja will be leading on. With my own female entrepreneur work trip hat on, I've started this week at the Set Squared Accelerator, and this felt a huge privilege given the closing down of opportunities elsewhere in the world. I've been applying for grants, jumping into angel investor conversations, and juggling customer briefs, and my brain is definitely in learning mode, for which I am very grateful. In other news, if you're in the UK this month, do come and see the EdTech Podcast at BET. I'll be in conversation with David Price OBE, author of Power of Us, and Valerie Hannon, author of Thrive on employability and skills. Come along and watch the recording live if you're around on Friday the 25th of March at the Teaching and Learning Theatre. And as always, the recording will be released after the event on the podcast feed, along with more episodes around skills, including esports and learning in the workplace. Okay. Let's jump straight into this episode with Svenja and Beth. Here we go. So, I am very excited. We have got a new series coming out on the EdTech Podcast, and it is looking specifically at some of the fantastic innovation coming out from female-led businesses and startups who are part of the EdTech Fellowship. So really excited about that partnership and surfacing some of the great innovation that's happening. I think we've got episodes across science, technology, engineering and maths, and of course the arts, but also corporate learning and everything else in between. To kick off the series, I'm joined here today by Svenja Buson and Beth Havinga from the EdTech Fellowship and European EdTech Alliance. And today is talking about why it is necessary to really put a spotlight on female entrepreneurship in this area, and also to talk about some of the inherent issues that still exist today and also what's being done about them. So Svenja and Beth, welcome.
Thank you.
As we record this, it is my birthday, and so I feel very excited that we are having such an important chat, but also, you can think of better people to connect with on this special day of mine. To kick off, let's talk a little bit about what the current situation looks like. There is so much information about the edtech sector, and obviously it's sort of exploded, especially in the last couple of years. But what's missing?
I can start really quickly. I think one of the scariest facts that we've come across in the past little while is just how little is being invested in females in general, but then also especially females in edtech. So in general, we're within Europe, at least, we're looking at about only 16% of all investments at all going to female-led or co-led innovations. And then when we extrapolate that out to edtech, we're talking about a minute percentage of the amount of female-led initiatives. And I think that's part of a bigger problem. There's a lot of bias in terms of women being perceived as not being strong. There's a number of instances that we've heard of investors starting to ask if the founders are planning a family soon, or whether they're going to actually see this through, if they're going to have to jump out as soon as their husband or partner needs to have extra support at home. Things that I doubt very much are going to be asked of the male colleagues within that industry. So I think it's an inherent problem in that regard. It's also a bias from the investor perspective. One thing that there's been a lot of research on is how females are perceived, and there's a lot of things about pitches, and a project that was looking into how pitches were received by investors saw that about 68 to 84% of the time, the investors would choose the male voiceover of the pitch versus the female voiceover. So what is that saying about what happens to those females in their pitches? And I think that's something that, to start with, is a really key thing we need to look at.
And do you get a sense of how EdTech shapes up versus other sectors, say like fintech or health tech, in terms of investment in female-led businesses?
I can talk about this because I'm right now writing a short study about how EdTech funds and more generalistic funds in Europe invest in female-led startups, it's no better than the other sectors, I'm afraid. Slightly better, but yeah, we're still very far away from that, from the ideal that we have. And Beth talked about the 16% of all funding. But when we look at VC, specifically VC funding, in total in Europe, only 1.3% of VC funding goes to women co-founded or founded startups in general, not just EdTech, but it's generalistic. And I think it's super scary. So yeah, and when you also look at Home IQ's latest study on the women, CEOs, it's just like crazy. When you look at the top 800 companies worldwide, you have only 13% of them that are being led by, female CEOs. That poses a huge problem, because at the same time you have 70% of the world's primary school teachers who are women. So it's problematic in terms of who creates the products and who uses.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I was going to bring up. Like, that is the irony that, certainly at the teacher level, and as with lots of other sectors, the higher up you go, then it starts to become more male dominated. But certainly at the teacher level, and lots of the end users of these products are female. And so what does that mean in terms of the sort of flow of money into innovation? And, what are we missing essentially?
So if I can jump in, I think it's 68% of all users in all schools that are female, and about 85% in primary schools. And this is extremely difficult because a lot of the teachers, especially up to sort of the age 8 or 9, understand that females and males learn differently. There are just those different trends towards learning. Females learn a lot more easily with a very strong narrative focus, whereas males do not necessarily. Of course, there's exceptions. But if you then, as a developer, as an innovator, come to developing a product with the ideas that you've brought with you from your own journey in learning, your own experiences in learning, you're going to be inherently including some biases in your product that you may not even realize are there, but that are excluding other learning types from proceeding on a path that they may need to be on. And for me, that becomes really problematic when we're looking at the primary school level and we're looking at the STEM subjects. Predominantly, they're male-led innovations. There's very few female-led STEM products that are, or that have a very wide range, unfortunately, at the moment. So that means we're looking at a learning type that has been predominantly led by one gender, being implemented by a different gender, and being then learned by a different gender. And I think that there is a correlation between some of the statistics we see in terms of the engagement or student engagement at that younger level, and the types of products that are being created for them. And there's no fault necessarily to the innovator, but at the same time, we really need to be critically looking at what kind of inherent biases there can be in products and how we can then resolve to change
I thought your point earlier was really interesting. Within a company now, there are pretty, if you're employed, essentially, there are pretty rigorous HR laws and regulation. And of course, it can be improved to sort of protect you from some of these issues. I'd be interested to take your view on whether in the land of entrepreneurship, whether there's the same protection from some of the excesses of experiences that can derail potentially some really fantastic innovation from landing. So I just wondered what your take on that was. And, here in the UK, there was the Rose Review, I think, which looked at entrepreneurship generally for female-led businesses. And it was quite critical of the sort of the perceived notion of what it is to be in a startup, the hours, the obsession, the drive, and there is quite a sort of almost homogenous idea of what that is.
I think for me, there's no safeguards. And that's one of the reasons why there are so many ground roots organizations solely focused on supporting women in tech in general, and then women in edtech. So when I was a founder myself and I was pitching, some of the best support I ever had when I was in the States, especially, was through some of the women in tech organizations. That was where I found the best contacts. That was where I got in front of the best investors. And a lot of the women there also said they are solely focused on trying to support other women because they understand what a challenge it can be. So it's exciting that those exist, but there's not a lot of them. And there are no checks and balances in terms of how to protect the women in that environment or how to support them better. The VCs, the investors, they will decide the way they want to go based on their own understanding and interpretation of what they've seen and heard. And as we've heard before, a lot of that is then also or has an underlying bias in terms of being skewed towards the sort of male voice, at least according to that one study. So it's difficult, and I think there is always that comparison towards the other sort of side.
Yeah, and there's also no lack of female founders. I mean, entrepreneurship, they attract women and men equally. And when you look at, for example, at Edtech France, we have, a very fair share of women founders, but the percentage of startups making it past post-seed stage, you have a look at it and you realize that women-led startups do not pick up like men-led startups because they don't get the same amount of support and they don't have the same codes. That's why also, we wanted to create the support system with the Female Edtech Fellowship and make sure that, female CEOs come together and share their best practices and make sure that they can help each other through hardships. So it's a 6 months program where we have 14 fellows coming in twice a month and sharing, and helping each other. And I think that's very important, the peer-to-peer aspect of it.
Yeah, I mean, from my own point of view, I came out of lockdown and attended an event for technology, engineering and creativity. So it's called Tech Women. So usually you might feel sort of heaviness on your shoulders when you attend some of these things. And it's hard to describe perhaps if you are like the normal person in the room. But if you're not, when you go into a room of people that are very much like you, are coming from the ability to talk openly, the ability to build that trust pretty quickly was so powerful. And actually after attending a couple of these, was definitely a catalyst to me starting my own business. So I completely love what you're doing, and we can talk a little bit more in a minute about what you're backing that up with as well, which is really exciting. But just to talk a little bit about why this is happening. Are women seen as more risky, do you think? Because I've seen some of the comments which are extremely frustrating when people say, this isn't fair, why are you supporting women? You should be supporting all entrepreneurs. And it's like, well, hang on, there's a problem here. And if you're an entrepreneur, that's what you do. You go out, you look at problems and you say, well, how can I make it better? But I'd just love to think a little bit about, why hasn't this improved already?
So I think because the same problems, not only in entrepreneurship, but also in the general workforce, women of a certain age still have to contend with the notion that they can't juggle a family life and a career. The notion, however sexist or biased, that they will be the ones to drop their work should their partner need to spend more time focusing on their job. And I think these are things where it's bad enough within the general industry, where women are asked at job interviews whether they're planning a family, where, people take one look at a pregnant stomach and say, well, that's a career ender. And then if you take that out into investments, into entrepreneurs, that's somebody else's money then, that they're saying, do I take this extra risk on top? However, and I think this is really interesting, there's also statistics on the fact that women-led products earn more than male-led products, and quite a bit. So it's like 31 cents per dollar invested is what a male product earns versus almost 90 cents per dollar. So there's a lot of research backing up the fact that female-led innovations are worth it and you should get behind them. But then we have that disparity between what's actually occurring and then those really exciting numbers that we see. But back to the question, it's a general societal issue that we're seeing then at a larger scale. And I presume that some of that is based on the fact that this is somebody's own money or their fund's own money that they're having to invest. And so if part of their entire job is balancing risk, and if that comes into that factor, then you've got that. And it's even worse than obviously for minority women, if in any kinds of minorities. And I think that's something else we need to then address.
Yeah, and it's also the question of who invests. I mean, when you look at the largest, at least the largest VC funds in Europe, Edtech, non-Edtech, you see that they are, they are male-led, and so obviously, they invest in people like them, and I think it's also. And it's not to blame them, and most of them are doing an amazing job, but it's just like, having this sense of you invest in people who are like you. And when you look at female-led funds, and I'm thinking of Rubio Ventures in the Netherlands, for example, led by, very strong women, they of course, they tend to invest in people who are, like them too. So it's just that we need more diversity. That's it. We just need more diversity within investment teams, and we need, women, men diversity, but also minority diversity. That's for sure, because you tend to go, and that's completely natural. So I'm not blaming anyone, but you tend to go towards people who are like you, and who are in your space, in your network, close to you. So I definitely think diversity in VC funds is absolutely, a key topic.
The other thing that you mentioned, Beth, about pregnancy, and it made me think, like, one of my absolute favorite female entrepreneurs is Rachel Courson from Guild Education, and I can't remember exactly which way round it was, but it was something like she raised a significant amount of money. It was either when she was pregnant with twins or just after she'd had them, like very soon after. And, I think it's fantastic. I think exactly what you said, more diversity begets more creative innovation. So yeah, let's find out a little bit more about the Edtech Fellowship. So we've got all of the brilliant entrepreneurs that you've pulled together coming up on the podcast, but I think you've got a bit of an announcement around the actual kind of funding mechanics of that as well, haven't you?
Yeah, no, I'm super happy and thrilled to be joining a VC fund. So I'll be an investor, and I have this amazing group of 14 fellows inside the Female Edtech Fellowship, and I hope that we'll be able to invest in some of them because they have like amazing track records. So yeah, I just want to make them more visible, because women CEOs, women-led startups exist. There are some of them doing amazing jobs, but investors don't look hard enough, in my opinion, because they're not they don't talk about themselves themselves that often. They're more in stealth mode. It's harder to find them because they're less visible than men. And also recently I've started doing some pitch trainings to help female founders who are currently fundraising to pitch to an investor. And I was shocked because when I receive male founded teams here, the attitude is completely different. They can sell themselves so much more easily, and they're not scared of selling themselves. And I think women tend to be more reserved on that, and they don't really tend to oversell themselves, and they're not that overconfident neither. But numbers speaks for them, and the rest speaks for them. So I'm just also helping some founders to gain a bit of self-confidence and just play the game, because it's a game.
It's really interesting on that front, because I've always felt that the kind of ecosystem around pitching and investment is very kind of homogenous. Like there's a way, and this is the way, and this is the environment, and there's an imbalance in who you're pitching to, that's both financial, but then in this case also a sort of power imbalance on other levels as well. But so do you think there's room for a kind of slight reinvention of that, or a more creative way of doing that as well? I was just interested to know. It's a very formulaic way, isn't it? And possibly that's brilliant because it's very efficient and everyone knows what they're dealing with. But I've always felt that sometimes when you have these very certain structures, I think people have become more aware, for example, in recent years, about the power of introverts and the power of people that aren't that alpha character but bring loads to the table. And I've just always thought, with like your traditional boardroom setup or XYZ, is there room to broaden that as well? And what would that look like?
It's an excellent question. But I think as long as the investor side is not more creative, and it's not going to be that easy, because right now there's a mold and you have to fit in the mold. And if we don't, change the shape of that mold, we're not, I mean, it's gonna be really complex. So but there are some extremely open-minded VCs who are doing things differently. But I think most of them are still quite traditional on that.
I think though as well, the pitch and things like that, they are extremely formulaic, but it's just that first impression. So I think after that, of course, there are more discussions at greater length, and you do have the ability to get to know the people better if you pass through that first impression. But I think we kind of work our first impressions no matter what environment we're in. Either it's the clothes we're wearing, the way we're made up, the way that we enter a room. I think all of us have been working on those different kind of formulas as well for most of our adult lives, or even before. They're formulaic as well. I think some of them we won't be able to change. What I hope we can change is, as Svenja was saying before, the ability to recognize and notice the women in the room. And from that respect as well, helping them get that notice, and then the ability to have real conversations following that aren't solely focused on how we're ever going to juggle our career and our families. And I think those are the things that we'd like to focus on. Building on what Svenja said as well, some of the conversations we've been having with the initial cohort have just been really eye-opening as well, in terms of what support we need to be providing our female founders. Things just as simple as, how do we get rid of team members that are dead weight or that aren't helping us achieve our goals? A lot of times you'll find the male counterparts just are a bit more ruthless in that capacity and can just say, not working, we need to get there, cut. Whereas the women go, did I make a mistake? Can I try and fix it? Can I help them? Can I heal them? And I think these are conversations where, again, we need to be a little bit more strict with ourselves and help the founders understand as well that we can focus solely on the business if that's our goal, that we can then have that as our best interest, and learn to sort of put the other feelings aside. However, in so saying, I think a lot of the female-led innovations are so productive and are so amazing in terms of the atmosphere of the working groups, because they have that other perspective and that other sort of side of empathy included in the makeup of the entire organization.
Fantastic. So I was going to ask about what other pockets of success have you seen? So who is investing in female startups and supporting them? Which amazing mentors, investors and entrepreneurs are saying enough is enough? But we kind of talked a little bit about what you're doing, but are there any other people that you'd like to kind of give a shout out to?
Yeah, I'd love to, give a shout out to Emerge Education, because, I'm doing this little study of, who are the VC funds are investing most in edtech female-led startups. And actually Emerge, fully male team. I'm talking about their investment team, but, they have at least a 50-50, almost a 50-50 balance. And so, there are some great examples of funds that are doing this, and obviously Edu Capital, female-led VC fund that also invests a lot in women. Rubio Ventures in the Netherlands, I talked about it, amazing team. So yeah, these three I would like to give a shout out to. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. Beth, how about yourself? Anyone else that you'd like to signpost?
Sadly, at the moment, not so much. I think there's a number of leaders, especially in the women in tech field, going back decades now, that have been really strongly advocating. And for me, Jenny Fielding comes into that. And then in terms of the States as well, there's, I think, a lot of the people who, at least I've been in pitches where they're talked to at New Schools Fund as well, Venture Fund have always been very strongly focused on supporting that parity between the organizations.
Just going back to that pushback of, how come you're just supporting female entrepreneurs? There's a really wonderful woman called Cindy Gallup who comes from the advertising space. I don't know if you've come across her work, but she has a keen use of expletives. But anyway, in retaliation to all of this, because you're just like, well, if things were moving, fine, but you have to have your targets and you have to, have a real goal and put yourself behind that. Yeah, just being really clear on what you want. And I just think going back to some of those pitch structures, I almost wonder, do we get to a point where is it more of an equal playing field if you have a balanced number of males and females in the room, say? Or, because think of how the power dynamics would change if you could bring together two female investors, two male investors, suddenly it would feel quite different. So anyway, I don't know whether we'll see anything that specific, but it is interesting to think about.
I think it would change some things about the dynamics, but at the same time, and this is what I hope we can also address really strongly with the fellowship, there are still so many learned behaviors that we would be working with that it may not change enough. I think it's also really important that we start looking at those dynamics also within ourselves, as Svenja is doing with working on the necessary aggression or arrogance to be able to sort of pitch in the right way, or the ability to focus on some of the management skills that you might need to bring those other aspects into it as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Finally, I've just got here any resources in this space. So I actually was having a conversation with a female CEO a couple of weeks ago, and she said, "Oh, you should check out this book called Brotopia." Have you read that? It's like an expose of sort of Silicon Valley being a utopia for innovation, but basically if you're a male, by a lady called Emily Chang, and she interviews a lot of top female execs. And again, this isn't about sort of saying men are terrible and we should not have male-led innovation. It's just about saying, like, let's open it up and make it a bit more interesting for everyone to get involved. Yeah, so if people are interested they want to come and pitch to this innovation fund that essentially is supporting female-led innovation and others, what should they do? Where should they go? How should they connect with what you're doing?
So first of all, they should apply on edtechfellowship.eu. And they should, reach out on LinkedIn, definitely. We'll put the link in the podcast description. But our next cohort starts in July. So.
And what kind of stage of startup are you looking for?
So we're mostly looking for post-seed growth stage. Yeah.
And you were saying you were getting a lot of interest in early stage support.
Yes, a lot of very early stage, pre-seed, seed stage startups come to us, and obviously they also need support. But we also might have a specific program for them. But for now, we're focusing on post-seed growth stage.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. And I'm really looking forward to sharing some of the startups that you're working with and their innovations. And I think it's absolutely fantastic. So well done for pulling it all together as well.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Have a good day, both of you. Bye.
Bye. That's all for this week's podcast episode. A huge thank you to our guests and to the team at Supercharger Ventures. We'll be back soon with another episode on school digital strategies with Claudia Raidmaker, VP, co-founder and CMO at Duggar, Madeline Wolf, the founder and CEO at Vision U, and Kadri Tuisk, founder and CEO at Planbeat. If you enjoyed this week's episode, don't forget to rate and review or share with a friend. And you can also drop us a voice note for inclusion in the next episode with your comments on what you thought or any ideas that the episode may have sparked in your head. So take care, everyone. Have a good week. Bye-bye.